wanted to start by telling you guys a little bit of a story, and I want to see if maybe you can relate to this story, because I'm pretty sure we've all been in this boat at some point or another. Have any of your parents ever told you a lie before? Yeah? I'm not a parent yet, but I'm sure when I am, I'll probably tell my kids lots of lies. You know, there's like the classic lie, like about Santa or the tooth fairy, which, sorry if I'm bursting your bubble right now, those are lies. But you know, as a kid, you believe everything your parent says, right? They tell you something, and they're the adult, they're wiser, they've lived for a longer amount of time, and so, especially as a kid, you're like, they're probably right. I mean, that's the truth. Why would I doubt them, right? And this was the same thing for me as a kid. I believed everything that my parents said. And one story that I remember particularly well from my childhood was when I was in around grade 2, and at the time, I was super into collecting snails. Who here ever collected snails? Probably none of you. Oh, yes, thank you. I'm glad. Wesley, nice. So I was really into collecting snails. I don't know why. Now I think that they're gross. But I had about 20 of them, and I made my own little habitat for them out of like this 2-liter Coke bottle. I put like moss in there. I had like shredded carrots. And I would go there every day, hang out with my 20 snails, talk to them, maybe even sing to them. These were like my little buddies. And I kept this little habitat that I made for them in my parents' garage. Little did I know, my parents did not like this arrangement because apparently snails give off a bit of a smell. But I didn't know that. I was an innocent little child. And so one day, I come home from school, and as usual, I go to the garage to go hang out with my snails, as I do. And I got to where the little habitat was, and it was empty. There was no snails in there at all. And I was completely heartbroken. So I go running to my mom. I'm crying. I'm like, Mom, where did my snails go? And you know what she tells me? She says that they ran away. And, you know, as a kid, that made sense, right? I was like, okay, I guess they didn't like living here anymore and they wanted to go out in the wild. I guess they ran away. But then, as I got older, I started to think, you know what? Snails are actually very slow. They're not escape artists. They can't run. How would they have gotten out of there? And I confronted my mother about it, and she admitted that she lied and that she had actually gotten rid of all of them. Boo, Marnie. I can't believe she would do that to me. And once I found that out, suddenly I started to question everything that my parents had ever told me. Suddenly I started thinking, wait, is what they said then really true? Did that pet really die, or did they just get rid of that one? Like, what is true? What's a lie? I started to question everything. Have you ever doubted before? Now, I'm not talking about, doubting the little lies that your parents tell you. Have you ever doubted God? Have you ever doubted your faith? Have you ever doubted the purpose of the church? See, I think right now we live in a world where it's becoming extremely popular to deconstruct your faith, to take what you believe and kind of pick it apart and figure out, okay, what is it that I actually believe? And I don't think that that's a bad thing. But as a result of that, we see a lot of people questioning their faith, questioning God, and then leaving the church entirely. And I can definitely say, for myself, I've wrestled with doubt before. There's been moments where I've thought, God, are you really there? Can you really hear me? I've gone to church my whole life, but is this what I actually want to believe? I've doubted. So what do we do with our doubt? Do we give in to it completely? Do we just try to push it down, ignore it, pretend it never happened? Well, before we get into that, I want to take a moment to look at some reasons for why we doubt. What leads us to this place of doubting? What brings up these questions? Well, firstly, I think we doubt when we don't understand. We doubt when we don't understand. Have you ever been reading through the Bible and you just get to a passage that does not make sense? Kind of like the one that we just watched on that video where you're like, is this even English? And you're reading these things and you're thinking, wait, this happened in the Bible, or God said this? And when we don't understand the Bible, we think, well, why would I follow a God who I don't understand? Or maybe it's not the Bible. Maybe it's you don't understand what's happening in the world. Well, why is there a war that's still going on in Ukraine? Why did a pandemic have to happen? Well, why is that person's mom in the hospital? These things happen around us that we don't understand, and we think, well, why would I follow God? And I think the easiest thing to do when we don't understand is to walk away. Rather than to pursue answers, rather than to try to dig deeper and find out the actual reasons, instead, the easiest thing to do is to say, I don't understand, and then leave it. We doubt when we don't understand. The second reason that we doubt, I think, is when Christians let us down. It's when Christians let us down. Now, this is something that I think we don't like to talk about as much because it's a little bit uncomfortable, especially when you're talking about it in a church. But the truth is that I think that Christians have been a source of hurt for a lot of people. Gandhi is quoted saying, I like your Christ, but I do not like your Christians because your Christians are so unlike your Christ. And the ugly truth is that sometimes it's Christians who put doubt in people's mind. It's Christians that turn people away. Maybe you were hurt by someone in the church. Maybe you used to go to another youth group, hopefully not Archetype, and they weren't too nice to you, they bullied you. Maybe the pastor said some messed up things that you really didn't agree with. Maybe you have a parent who has been taking you to church their whole life. And when they're at church, they're all in, they're raising their hands, they seem like the perfect Christian, but when they come home, they're verbally abusive to you. And you think, is this what following Christ looks like? Maybe there's someone that you looked up to so much who was a pastor or a leader, and you looked up to everything that they said, but then one day they disappointed you. One day they actually got kicked out of the church, and you think, well, why would I follow a God who has people like that in their kingdom? When Christians let us down, we start to doubt the whole thing. And lastly, I think we also doubt when we face difficulties. It's easy to follow God when everything's going great, right? It's easy to follow God when your life is fantastic, when everything's going your way. It's like, okay, God, I can easily follow you now. You're making everything work out for me. But when it gets hard, when that diagnosis comes in that you weren't expecting, when those bullies keep pestering you and pestering you and pestering you, and you think, God, where are you? How do you have faith then? We start to doubt, does God really care about me? Is he actually here? And even if he is he the kind of God that I want to follow? Now, all of you have your own story, and I'm sure there's many other reasons for why people doubt, for what leads them to that. But the point is that all of us are going to doubt at some point. And if it's not yet, eventually I'm telling you, you're going to get to a point where you might question what it is that you believe. You might question your faith. And I want you to know that you're not alone. There are so many people who have struggled or are struggling with doubt, even in the church. And in fact, I actually want to look at a story today in the Bible of a man who was super close to Jesus, probably the closest that you could get, and yet he also struggled with doubt. We're going to be looking at today at a disciple of Jesus named Thomas. Now we're going to be reading in John 20, and at this point in the Gospel of John, Jesus has already been crucified by the Romans. He's already died a death that he didn't deserve. He's been buried in a tomb, and then he's been raised to life. And now he's starting to appear to people. He's starting to come to them in his new resurrected body and say, I'm alive. And he's already appeared to quite a few people, including most of the disciples, except for Thomas. So if we pick up in verse 24, it says this. It says, one of the 12 disciples, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, was not with the others when Jesus came. They told him, we have seen the Lord. But he replied, I won't believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his hands, put my fingers into them, and place my hand into the wound in his side. Now, Thomas, he's gotten a bit of a nickname from this passage. He's known as Doubting Thomas. And it's kind of an unfortunate nickname, right? You think, okay, I made it into the Bible. Guys, gather around. My name's in here. Let's look. And you're known as the guy who doubts. Not really what you want to be known for, right? But I want to go on record to say that I think that we need to cut Thomas a bit of slack, because I think that any of us would react the exact same way. Thomas says, if I don't see it, I'm not going to believe it. And how often do we also say the same thing to God? We say, God, if you would just show me this, if you would just do this miracle in my life, if you would just heal this person, get me an A on this test, if you would just make this person disappear, then I'll believe you. If you show me, then I'll believe it. See, Thomas hadn't seen Jesus raised from the dead, and so he didn't believe. He doubted. But read what happens next in verse 26. It says, 8 days later, the disciples were together again, and this time Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them. Peace be with you, he said. Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here and look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound in my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe. My Lord and my God, Thomas exclaimed. Then Jesus told him, you believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me. So let's unpack the story a little bit. Like I said, Jesus has raised from the dead. He's appeared to many of the disciples, and Thomas hasn't seen him yet, and so he doesn't believe. He still has some questions. He has some doubts, but he's sticking around a little bit. And it's not until Jesus comes to him, shows him the wounds in his hands and his feet, that Thomas actually is able to put aside his doubt and believe. And remember, this is Thomas. He was a disciple of Jesus. He had walked with Jesus for years. He had seen him heal the sick. He had seen him multiply food. He had seen him preach over and over again. Thomas knew Jesus well. He knew what Jesus was capable of. And yet, he still couldn't help but doubt. He still couldn't help but ask some questions. So for us, how should we navigate our doubt? Not all of us have the privilege of being able to see Jesus face to face, of being able to walk with him for years and years. So how do we navigate these questions? Well, first, you need to recognize that your doubt does not disqualify your faith. Your doubt doesn't disqualify your faith. I think that we tend to have this negative view of doubt in the church. If you have a question, if there's something that maybe you're struggling with a little bit, you're seen as not a good enough Christian. You're seen as someone who just doesn't have enough faith. You shouldn't have those questions. You should just trust and believe. We put out these messages about doubt, and because of it, there's a lot of shame and guilt around it. There's a lot of shame around having any sort of question at all, and so then we just keep quiet. But doubt does not disqualify your faith. If we look at the Bible, there were tons of righteous, amazing leaders who loved God, who served him with their whole heart, and they doubted at some point. John, the cousin of Jesus, he spent his whole life pretty much preparing the way for Jesus to come. He baptized people, he preached. He was kind of seen as a little bit of weirdo, but he did it all for the sake of Jesus. And then one day, he was actually arrested for his faith. He was put into prison, and the Bible records that he actually sent some disciples to Jesus, asking him, are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else? This is John, who had spent years boldly preaching that Jesus was the Messiah, and now, suddenly, when he's in a rough place, when he's put in prison, he starts to question things. He starts to think, is this the real thing? Abraham, another leader in the Bible, he is known as the father of Israel, and he was known to be a man of great faith. He followed God with his whole heart, and then one day, God promises him and his wife, who is barren, that he's going to bring them a son in their old age. And what does Abraham do? He laughs. He does not believe that God would do this kind of miracle in his life. Over and over again, if we look throughout the Bible, there are these incredible leaders who loved God, who served him, but also had questions, who also experienced doubt. And yet, over and over again, we see God redeem their situations and use them despite the doubts that they have. See, the enemy is going to try to convince you that your doubt is too big. He's going to try to condemn you. He's going to try to say, well, if you have that question, you just shouldn't follow Jesus at all. If you have any sort of doubt, you shouldn't even go to Archetype. He's going to try to tell you that it's too big. Whereas God can take a person's doubt and use it for something good. Because your doubt is not a barrier to God. It's not. Look at how Jesus responded to Thomas's doubt. He knew that Thomas had questions. He knew that Thomas was going through some doubt. And yet when he comes to him, he doesn't condemn him. He doesn't shame him. He doesn't say, well, you're going to have to find the answers on yourself. He met Thomas where he was at. Jesus came to Thomas in a miraculous way, might I add, despite his doubt, despite his questions. He didn't wait for Thomas to believe. He didn't wait for Thomas to get to the answer himself. The first thing that Jesus says is, peace be with you. Peace be with you. He shows up. He gives Thomas the evidence that he's looking for, and he says, believe. Believe. Thomas's doubt was not a barrier to Jesus. It didn't disqualify his faith. Now, the next thing that I think that we need to do when we're dealing with doubt is that we need to deal with our doubt in community. We need to do this in community. See, I think many times in the church, we feel like we're alone. We look around the room and we see all these people raising their hands, and they seem like they're so into it. They're nodding along to the sermon, saying amen. And we think, am I the only one who feels this way? Am I the only one who has questions? Am I the only one who's not really feeling it right now? And because of that, we isolate ourselves. We don't tell anyone. We keep our questions quiet. But look at what Thomas does. He isn't shy about sharing his doubts. He doesn't hide the fact that he has questions. He openly says, you know what, guys? I don't believe it. And I'm not going to believe it unless I see it. And I think that instead of looking down on this kind of response, we could actually learn from it, because I think we need that kind of honesty around here. Because the church should be a place where we welcome questions and pursue answers. We need to welcome questions and pursue answers. That's why we have things like ARC sessions, things where we can dive deeper and really get into the nitty-gritty of, okay, what is it that we believe? What is it that we're subscribing to? That's why Broadway has things like Alpha, where we can dive deep into those questions about faith and God and life that a lot of times we're too scared to talk about with other people. We want to have those open spaces here at church because we believe it's important to have those kind of conversations and to pursue the answers together. See, our doubts have so much more power over us when we keep them to ourselves. When we just stew in all these questions and we think, okay, I'm struggling with this. I don't know if I believe this. I'm having a difficult time getting my head around this. But we don't share it with anybody, it eats us. But when you have people who can keep you accountable, who can walk with you, who can help you maybe find the answers, maybe they've struggled with those things too and they've found a way to get through it, we become so much stronger. We need to be intentionally inviting others into these kinds of conversations. Find trusted people who can guide you. Find a mentor. Find a friend who you can walk with through life. And if you feel like, okay, I don't know if I have anyone like that, talk to one of your leaders. Talk to one of your pastors. I would love personally to walk with any of you through any questions or doubt you might have. Just don't do it on your own. For me, I faced doubt a number of times in my life. A lot of you might have heard my story before, but for me, I attended church my whole life. I grew up actually going to Broadway. And I knew all the verses. I would pray before bed and before meals. And it was just a part of my life. But suddenly, when I got older, when I started to go through more struggles with mental illness and those kind of things, I started to think, okay, is this what I really believe? Is this actually something that I want to follow for the rest of my life? Or is this just something that my parents passed down on to me? And as I struggled, as I went through these difficult times, God just felt so far away. It was during this time in my life that doubt started to creep in, and I had these questions like, where is God in this? Does he love me? Does he see the kind of pain I'm in? Does he even care about me? Why is he allowing me to go through this? And why have faith at all if I'm struggling so much? I felt like the worst person ever for having those questions. I felt like I was a bad Christian. But when I decided to be vulnerable, when I opened myself up to people in my life and told them the questions that I was struggling with, the doubts that I was going through, I wasn't met with shame. I wasn't met with condemnation. But instead, I found a new community of people who could walk with me through my doubt, through those struggles that I was going through. And we found answers together. I was able to discover a faith that wasn't my parents, that wasn't my grandparents, that wasn't my Sunday school teachers, but that was actually my own. It was something that was even greater than what I had before. Which leads me to my last point today, is to see your doubt as an invitation to deeper faith. See your doubt as an invitation to deeper faith. Look at what Jesus does with Thomas. He goes to him and he shows him the scars and the wounds. He says, this is what I had to go through. And then he invites him to something greater. He says, don't be faithless any longer. Believe. Jesus is inviting Thomas into a deeper faith. See, oftentimes I think we look at faith as though it's a destination. It's something that we'll get to eventually once we're old enough, or once we've been going to church for long enough, once we've attended enough church services, or, we'll get there eventually. Maybe not now, But the truth is that faith is not a destination. It's a journey. There's going to be times when your faith is strong, when you're all in for God, when everything is a breeze, and you think, of course I have faith. And then there's going to be other times where it's really hard, where you're struggling, and you think, where is God in this moment? So if you think that eventually you're just going to get to a point where you have it all together, where you're going to be at the peak of faith, you're never going to get there. Because it's not perfect faith we should be after. It's persistent faith. See, I have a feeling that Thomas wanted to believe. I have a feeling that he wanted to push through those doubts. He wanted to believe that Jesus was back. I mean, that was the best case scenario, right? But inside, he was just struggling so much. But I think there was this part of him that still wanted to hold on, which is why I think he stayed around with the disciples. Deep down, he was trying to hold on to faith, even if it was small. He persisted, even though his doubt was still there. And because of that, because he chose to fight through the doubt, because he chose to stick around, he actually was invited to a deeper faith than he had ever known before. It's actually recorded that he went on to be a martyr for Christ, that he went on to preach the gospel and to spend his whole life sharing the good news of Jesus, and then was eventually killed for his faith. But he was so committed to it. See, a lot of us, we might feel intimidated by doubt. We think, I don't want to even go there, because once I do, I might go over the edge. I might not make it back. And so I'm just going to ignore those questions. I'm just going to push them down. I'm not even going to give them a second thought. But it's actually through wrestling with our doubt, through asking the tough questions, pursuing the truth, trying to figure out for ourselves what we truly believe, that we actually get to get away from that safe, comfortable version of Christianity that we know and find a much deeper relationship with God. Philosopher Francis Bacon said, if we begin with certainties, we'll end in doubt. But if we begin with doubts and bear them patiently, we may end in certainty. See, the doubts that you have, the questions that you might be facing right now that are running through your mind, could actually be an invitation to a greater faith if you'll allow them. Which brings me to my big idea for today. I don't often do big ideas, but if there's one thing that I want you to be able to take away from this message, it's this. It's to allow your doubt to deepen your faith. Allow your doubt to deepen your faith. See, when we doubt, we tend to distance ourselves, right? We tend to just push down those questions, to isolate ourselves, to stop coming to church, to stop hanging around with our church friends because we think, I don't know what I believe anymore. I don't want to commit. We let doubt derail our faith, but instead we need to let it deepen our faith. And how do we do that? By surrounding ourselves with people who will push us forward, who will invest in us, who will walk with us as we wrestle through these questions. by reminding ourselves of who God is, going back to the Bible, looking at those verses and saying, God, I might not feel it right now. I might not see it in the situation that I'm in, but you promise to be good. This is who you say you are, and so I'm going to rely on that. It's by persevering, even when we don't have all the answers, even when we feel so unsure and when everything is rocky in life, but continuing to say, God, I will trust you. I will have faith, even when I don't have the answers. Allow your doubt to deepen your faith. Thomas could have given into his doubt. He could have walked away. He could have found something else to do. He could have leaned into those questions. Even after Jesus showed himself to him, he could have said, but Jesus, you died. You left us. Am I really supposed to believe in this? Am I really supposed to believe in a Messiah who left? Thomas could have given into that. But instead, he leaned into his faith. He put his trust in Jesus. And he didn't let his doubt have the final word. Are you doubting today? Are there questions that you have about faith or God or life that you just have not been able to wrestle through? I don't have all the answers for you. I don't have the cure for doubt. I wish I did. But what I can say is that there is a God who comes to you in your doubt, just like he did with Thomas. He meets you where you're at, no matter what questions you have, no matter where you are in life. And he invites you to let it deepen your faith. He invites you and he says, come with me. We'll walk through this together. I want to show you the scars on my hands, the wounds in my feet. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe. He's inviting you to let it deepen your faith if you allow him to. And so if everyone would just bow their heads and close their eyes, just out of respect for everyone around you.